Greetings, friends. Your cartoonist pal Stan here with a new episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon, the show I've been doing to celebrate the fact that 2024 was the 50th anniversary of the game Dungeons and Dragons and the entire hobby of tabletop role playing game. And we've gone through a full year of these. As I have these interviews, I've been doing interviews with folks who have worked on the game. And as I talk to them, I've been doing a cartoon homage to a classic piece of D&D art, one from each of the 50 years. We're now actually at the 52nd year because of the way math works, right? 74 to 2024 is actually 2020, 21 year, or 51 years if we do one from each year. And we're now in 2025. And I'm doing a drawing today based on a book that was just released recently, the Monster Manual for the new 2024 edition of the world's most popular role-playing game. Hello, Michael J. Pastor. Thank you for joining us. Glad to see you, my friend. And so this is going to complete the first mission. And think a bit about Star Trek with a 5-year mission. Got to do different things in each year. We've finished the first year of our 5-year mission. I'd hope that this show will go on at least that long. Hello, Merrick Blackman. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us today. Anyway, that's what I'm doing here. That's what I'm going to be drawing. But like I say, the thing that really makes this work is that I've got cool people to talk to. And today I have the gentleman who is the current creative director for Dungeons and Dragons, and he has worked on both of the most recent iterations of the core books and a whole lot more. And he's a heck of a lot of fun to talk to. I'm going to bring him on so I don't say anything else that might be terribly wrong, because as people who watch the show know, I often do that in these intros. So I'm just going to open up here and bring in Jeremy Crawford. Thank you for joining me today, Jeremy.
Always great to see you, Stan.
You know what? It's not that I don't know my friends. It's that I get talking and then I'll walk myself into a corner and I'll just say crap. And I know that's not fully true, but it sounds good, and they'll tell me I'm wrong. That'll be good. That'll be good radio, as they say.
Yeah, that's right. And hello, everyone who's joined us.
Yeah, so we've got Michael J. Pastor and Merrick are the folks who've said hi so far. Got about 10 or so people watching live, and I tell you, it only takes a year, but it's starting to be that in the first week or so of the show, a few hundred starting to creep up into the nearing 1,000 people will watch it. So makes me happy. So Jeremy, am I right that creative director is your current title? Because I know the other thing they've done in the last few years is change titles without always changing what the job is.
Yeah, my title is now game director.
Okay.
And Chris Perkins is the creative director, and we are, as ever, sort of a dynamic duo, creative partners. But yeah, he was designated creative director, and I was designated game director. And what that means in terms of practicality is that Chris oversees the team that deals with a lot of the major story beats for D&D and works with many of our partners who are working on, comic books, video games, and many other exciting things, whereas I oversee the writing and editing teams that put the words both in our books and on D&D Beyond.
Awesome. So basically, as the books are being written, so that sounds to me, again, just kind of putting it through my filter, that Chris is kind of in charge of the big picture map at the start, and you're in charge of the the road map as people are going down step by step.
Well, and both of us, along with Jess Lanzillo, our vice president, and our art director, and our producers, and our partners in the business side of the house, we all together work on the D&D roadmap. And sometimes Chris's team is coordinating with my teams on actually making product, but sometimes they're working on top secret things that again involve other companies.
Mm.
Whereas my teams, we are focused every single day on what's coming for the role playing game, and we still have Chris over as often as we can, and
Well, I mean,
we are
why wouldn't you, right?
well, yes, and we are, for instance, right now doing a review for our upcoming starter set. We're looking at all the printouted pieces, and Chris is a part of that process, and
So
that's super.
when does that scheduled to hit the street, as they say?
So I am not going
Around.
to give it. I'm not. It's later this year.
Okay.
So I I I long ago learned to be very careful about trying to
Right.
remember all of our release dates, partly because I
Fair
am so
enough.
often working in the future. Like
Yes.
I am working right now on products that some come out this year, some come out next year, some come out the year after next,
Right.
and now that there are release dates, there are early release dates. I always default to later this year,
Right.
whatever the website says. That's when it
That's
comes out.
and oh no, that's not right. Oh well. I was hoping I was going to get very quickly pull up what Amazon said, because we can sure say that, but it's still my quick look, because I don't want to be heads down. I want to talk to you. My quick look was sending me to something that was already available. All right. So, but I can say that I know that it's usually a matter of several months at least, and that's really the reason I asked that was to kind of not to get the specifics, but to show for the audience that you guys are looking at the finished proofs. They've still got months to go before they're going to show up, and lots of ways that things can happen in the middle, uh, particularly with
Oh, and we
shipping and print and production issues.
and and the way our work proceeds is when we're looking at printouts. Uh, there's still a lot that can shift because uh, while we do so much of our work online, there's no replacing, especially when you're going to make an analog product, actually seeing the physical thing in front of you. I mean,
Right.
any of us who've worked on something, whether it's because our job or because it's our hobby, we've probably all had that experience where you've been looking at it for months, and then the moment you print it out, like sticking out like a splinter, you will see some you will
It,
see some error that's like, my god, this has been in front of me
but
for half a
it
year.
happens at each stage too,
Yes.
and invariably we make our peace with the fact that that'll happen, and then it'll happen during editing, it'll happen during layout, and then when the printed book comes in, it'll still happen again, despite the fact that 14 people have done their best going over it with fine tooth combs.
Well, and it's really, for me, it's a joy every single time,
Yeah.
because also it's really when you have all those printed out pages for a book, or in this case for the starter set, the printed out components. It's when you really have that sense that this is real.
Right. Right.
This has gone from again this creative endeavor that we've been toiling on for a long time, sometimes multiple years. I mean, especially with like the new core books and this new starter set. I mean, this
Yeah.
project has been over 3 years, and in many ways, the starter set is the bow on it. We like to talk about The three core books is a trilogy that are heavily integrated together, but in many ways, for me, it's the starter set that is the bow that ties them all together, where you get to see all of the pieces of the game brought together in
Right.
one place and also presented in a way that is meant to make the game as inviting as possible.
Right.
And one of the things, and you and I were chatting before, one of the things I'm so excited about this new starter set is all of the different ways that we are exploring new methods for presenting different parts of the game to people.
Yeah.
Always, taking many of the lessons we've learned over the last 10 years with fifth edition, uh, looking for totally new ways to present, your character options, how you manage different parts of your character, how can different people learn how to play, how to DM rather quickly, how easy can we make it for multiple people to switch off being DMs, and a whole lot more. So it's very, very
That's
fresh in my mind.
so that's going to be in this one. I'm really excited about that. I
Yeah, and that's something that we have talked a little bit about publicly, and I can't go into too much detail about it tonight. But we have teased that one of the big goals for this new starter set is to make it as easy as possible to switch off who the DM is, because we want, especially people who are dipping their toes into D&D for the first time, to be able to like try out DMing one session, then the next session they're one of the players and one of the other players is the DM, uh, and I think people are really going to dig how easily it is to hop from the player role to the DM role and then back again.
Merrick Blackman says that on EN World somewhere it was stated that the release date is September 16th, which may be true. Let's go with that.
And
Michael
look,
Pastor
and,
ask a question with Michael. He just said he can't tell you details.
but one thing I can say first off is, look, you just learned why I say later this year, and
Yeah,
September 16th sure is later this
provided
year.
that article is accurate. Yeah.
Yes. And we have said that various physical components are definitely a part of this, and we will go into a whole lot more details, uh, when things are ready for us to actually show people, because
Right.
uh, we have found that especially whenever you do something new, you can talk about it, but there's no replacing just showing it,
Yeah.
letting people see examples. And we've experienced this throughout fifth edition. It's one of the reasons why we're such believers in sending things out like through Unearthed Arcana, uh,
Mhm.
to again, we can talk about things theoretically, but there's nothing like just show people the actual thing and get their impressions of it.
Right. Um, yes, I will say, not pretending to this at all. That my experience has always been that until until the print this button is sent, the thing is sent out to the printers. Anything that's supposed to be in there can change as pricing changes, and you
Hmm.
can find components shifting or changing or dropping out entirely or being added and last minute depending on how that goes. So uh, yeah, don't we've got a pretty you've got a pretty good I say I don't know. You've got a pretty good idea, but as you said, much better to be able to show people this is what it is. Because the other thing that I've often found is when I've been in situations where the group or company I've been working with has told people there's going to be X. People, if you don't have it to show them, will decide in their head what it's supposed to be, and if what they've decided is grander than what can be produced, they're disappointed with this great thing. Here's a great thing.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
thought it was going to be great plus 12. Sorry. Hello, Chris Andrew. Thank you for joining us. Um, Chris says, thank you for bringing Dragonlance back. with Shadow of the Dragon Queen and Warriors of Kryn. And,
I,
and Chris is a big. It was like because you can take a bow. You did it. It's you.
well, it was the team, and but I can certainly say for myself, I am a huge Dragonlance fan. I started running the original Dragonlance modules before the novels were even out. Like that's how much of an old timer I am.
Perfect
Uh,
segue. Perfect
yes,
segue.
because we haven't talked about my D&D origins, but I
Right.
am
I'm gonna
such
switch
a
the
D&D.
view, and we're gonna
I'm
start talking about the secret origins uh, of Jeremy Crawford. So, how did gaming, or what we call hobby gaming now, which was not a term back then, how did you get into that in general?
So it started when I was in elementary school, and this was back in the 1970s. Yes, D&D and I are uh, we are about the same age. I'm a tiny bit older than D&D, and my sister, she tried out D&D. One of the other kids in our apartment complex, he was DMing for different kids in the complex. She
Okay.
tried it out, and she was like, okay, you've got to try this game out. You can do anything you want. And sure enough, it was only later I found out that what he was doing is he had adventures and he was running them but with no rules. So we literally were doing anything we wanted. Like he would read out a description from one of the modules and just say, "What do you do?" And we're like, "You mean we can do anything?" And so that was my initial introduction to D&D, was that it was this sandbox for unbridled creativity. I then became even more enchanted when I kept wanting to find out more and discovered, wait, there are actually rules for this. And I loved how the rules were ways to provide structure for that creativity. And to this day, I believe very strongly that uh, it is all about that unbridled creativity at its heart, and the rules are a tool in service to that creativity, a tool that DMs and players can use in whatever way suits their group. And for some groups, their joy is to run the game exactly as it's written. Other groups, they hack the heck out of it into their own homebrew masterpiece. And
Mm-hmm.
then there are other groups that find their place somewhere in between. And over the years, I've played all of those modes. I've played by the book D&D. I've played somewhere between it's a complete homebrew creation, and then the full homebrew creation. And I love that the game, and this is again part of what drew me to it as a kid, that it was more than a game, that it's also a hobby that inspires so many of us to create adventures, create worlds, create pantheons, create cultures, design new spells, new classes, new monsters. So much of our excitement, those of us who've been fans of the game, whether we're brand new fans or we've been fans for decades, so much of what fires us up is the game invites us to create and to create together.
Right.
And then back then in the ye old days, I also started to discover other games as they began to emerge. But it's funny, those of us who were around back then know there weren't many options at first. I mean, really, to begin with, D&D was literally the only game in town when it came to tabletop role playing. Uh, Now, D&D did, in addition to whetting my appetite for role playing games in general, and that later led to me trying out all sorts of different role playing games, and then even later in my life working on other role playing games. But D&D also opened the door for me to become interested in tabletop gaming in general. And so, now I am a gaming omnivore. I spend my days working on D&D, and often my free time playing it and DMing it. But I also play tons of board games. I play video games. I play card games. Basically, if it's a game, I will try it. And But really, my home, where I always come back, is D&D or some version of it, because so many of the games that I love to play, of course, have their creative roots in the soil of Dungeons and Dragons.
So what was the that first product that which version of the game was your intro? Was it a beginner's box, or was it the
It
the hard
it
cover?
was it was the beginner's box.
Which
Uh,
which cover?
it was the blue one, the blue cover with the dragon on the front.
um, was it was the Holmes box, the one with the you know what, I'm gonna my easiest reference is right here. Was it this one?
Yep.
All right. Yeah.
Oh, yep. And that's why that image for me,
Me
um,
too.
it is probably one of the most powerful D&D images for me
Yeah.
to this day. Uh, because I see that and I feel like I'm in elementary school again. And
Yeah.
and and when I first felt the magic of D&D. So yeah, yeah, Stan. As soon as that came up, my heart was pitter
Yeah.
pattering. Uh, oh, oh, the magic of it. Yes, and I see in chat we are the Blue Book babies. uh, and then my first of the AD&D books was, like for many of us back then, was the Monster Manual. Uh,
Right.
and and My God, did that book uh, knock my socks off! Was such a treasure trove of inspiration. Uh, every monster, and it's easy to forget that book said almost nothing about any of them.
Right.
but 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 the little that was said, it was so magical and so inspirational, and that's something that uh, we continue to strive for, even today. That, always remembering, even if there's not room to say a whole lot, let's make sure what we say is going to inspire DMs to create adventures, maybe even whole cultures, all about a particular monster or that monster's uh, ecology. Then later, I got the player's handbook, and finally the dungeon master's guide. And my goodness, uh, for as young a kid as I was, uh, I both adored the Dungeon Master's Guide and
Yeah.
was endlessly baffled by it, because again, I was in elementary school, because again, I started playing D&D when I was 6. And so
Wow.
when I started trying to read that DMG as an elementary school kid, I was like, whoa, woo. Yeah, my vocabulary definitely was supercharged by
Yeah.
trying to make sense of the original AD&D books.
That's it. I mean, wow. There are like four different things I want to have long conversations about in that, but that's certainly a topic that's come up before. A number of us who started back then, the it, the D&D, the writing for D&D rules and products were intro- expanding our vocabulary, and
Yeah.
certainly some of the designers I've talked to have continued to think that that is an important part that they make sure they put in everything they do, is to try and uh, stretch, like not talk down to anyone. In fact, aim a little higher than you think your audience is, to stretch and learn something along
It I agree 100%. And my goodness, even today we were talking about this at work,
the way.
where we look at some of our word choices, and especially in a starter set, we have to consider, is this too far? But then many of us had the experience of uh, those $5 words are exactly what inspired many of us as kids. And so we definitely strike a balance, as with so many things in D&D, because uh, the one of the many parts of its magic is that it appeals to so many different people from varied backgrounds with different education levels, different tastes in terms of play style. And so we're always looking currently to make sure we're appealing to as many of these different modes as possible, because that's been a part of D&D's DNA throughout its half a century of existence.
I
Of
think. Sorry, I thought your sentence was not.
Oh no, please go ahead.
I would say one of the things that you said there, which I found super interesting, is that your sister was uh, for a number of reasons. One is that forget about sister, brother, whatever. It was my experience, and most of the people I've talked to's experience that they were the only person in their family that got it. Either they were uh, um, they didn't have siblings, or their siblings weren't interested and they had to try to find their experience out there, and they or at at best they were the oldest sibling and they forced their younger ones to play. um, but I find it really interesting that your sister was the one that came and told you about it and brought you in on it.
Well, and we had a tradition of playing games. I mean, we played a lot of card games together. We would play board games, and again, back then, the board game pickings were pretty sparse compared to now. But game playing was definitely a part of our family, and even though Amy was the one who introduced it to me, she kind of moved on from it pretty quickly. But oh my goodness, did that did that dragon filled game sink its claws into me to to this day. uh and but what one of the things I love as D&D has reached its 50-year anniversary and now goes beyond it, is how intergenerational it has become, because now
Yeah,
uh, Amy's children, my nephew and niece, they now play D&D. And and when possible, we currently live in different states. We are within our family. Some of us have played D&D together as adults, uh, and uh, and then even my stepsister, uh, some of her children also play D&D. So it is definitely a thing that I see not only in my family but in many others, that people now play the game with their children. Many teachers now DM for their students, and then
right.
their students become DMs, and they DM for other students. It for me has been a very beautiful thing to see this game that in the 80s, for a while, it looked like, it was going to be viewed as this naughty thing with the satanic panic and all
Yep.
that. And now fast forward to the 50th anniversary, and now parents are playing this game with their kids. Schools have D&D programs, and even some churches now have D&D groups that
Right.
play in their facilities. We've come a
It,
long way.
we have, and I guarantee you we'll be talking about that at the end of the hour. So um, a lot of people have talked about how after a good beginning they kind of become lapsed gamers at some point in the high school into college, very often because they lose their first group and then can't find a second group. Did you manage to continue to play throughout your childhood into adulthood?
So I once I started playing D&D, I played D&D and other role-playing games all through high school, into my first year of college, and even into my second year of college. My little blip where I stopped gaming was my last 2 years of college and when I was in grad school. So there's about a 4-year period in there where I wasn't playing, partly because of moving around. I was going to school in different parts of North America. I was in California, then I was in New York, and then I was back in California, and then I was up in Canada because I was briefly doing some graduate study up at the University of British Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
So during that period, my gaming largely paused. But before that, like through high school, uh, it was and junior high school, a very rich game playing time. I had a group of friends that would come over to my house often once a week, or we would gather at one of their houses for weekly D&D games. Then when Marvel superheroes came out, we were playing that, and then uh, we then started trying other role playing games by companies other than TSR. But the games we came back to most often in that period were D&D, the Marvel superheroes
Mm-hmm.
RPG, and then eventually Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and
What?
those those were the ones that captivated us, and we did a lot of sort of experimental gatherings in those days. So this was before, like, these days we have all these great game conventions with events like D&D epics. Back then, in those earliest days of the hobby, that was not the norm. But group, group groups like mine, we started doing experiments. Like, I remember for the Marvel Superheroes RPG, uh, we got the Secret Wars module and gathered as many kids as we could from our school to play as many of the superheroes as we could have played in that module. We also, because we I grew up on the central coast of California, and couldn't make it to Gen Con throughout my childhood,
Right.
but we would hear about these big tournaments with adventures like the Ghost Tower of Inverness. And so, not to just sort of sit on the sidelines and feel FOMO, my group of friends, we got the Ghost Tower of Inverness, and we had different groups all running at the same time and doing the tournament scoring. And so we had our own tournament at home in San Luis Obispo, California. Similarly, before the term LARP, or live action role playing, was even a thing,
Right.
we were doing massive live action D&D games on the property of one of my dearest friends, who we are still very close, and in fact he is in my D&D group to this day. He had a property outside town where, uh, for one of these events, we got together 50 kids from our high school to all play different D&D characters, and spanning several days. Like, we camped on the property and had these where we took the rules of D&D and sort of hacked them to run a LARP. Again, this was before the term LARP was even a thing, and it was astounding. And that environment of being in an area where there were so many people excited to try out this new type of game,
Mm-hmm.
uh, really created an amazing sort of cauldron for me and many of my friends to get our feet wet as designers, as writers. We were also fortunate in having a game convention in San Luis Obispo called Polycon that's going on to, all the way till now. The college still has this convention, and I got to meet Dave Arneson at that convention.
Nice.
Uh,
Wow. Yeah, I
and
haven't met
then
many people whose backgrounds I'm jealous of, but I'm kind of jealous of that.
and then it was such a privilege to get to meet Dave. I went to a panel of his at the convention, but then uh, it was an especially amazing opportunity some years later when, as a late high school student and early college student, I worked at the game store in my hometown called Games People Play, and Gary Gygax came as a guest for the day, and I got to be there with him for the whole day. This was in 1989,
Nice.
and I still have on my shelf the Dungeon Master's Guide that he signed, and that was a pivotal experience for me. And what's so funny when I look back on what I chatted with Gary about that day is, first off, it didn't even occur to me then that someday this could be my job. It
Right.
was that it was such a new thing still that it just seemed like an impossible dream to imagine someone could do this for a living. Um,
That's I just to pause there. That's one of the interesting things that I was going to wind up asking you about, because so many people have part of their origin story is the part where suddenly that light comes on. It's like, wait, people do this for a living.
yes. Um, but then, but then I also look back and I think, wow, I got to spend a whole day with Gary Gygax. Uh, what D&D secrets did I try to discover? What insights did I push him for? And what's so dear to me is that I was a young teenage D&D fan.
Yeah.
Talked to Gary about. I talked to him about our campaign, and I asked him about the Temple of Elemental Evil because that had finally come out, and my friends and we ran the Village of Hamlet, and uh, now everyone can take it for granted that, oh yeah, the Village of Hamlet goes with the Temple of Elemental Evil. But those of us who were around when it was all coming out in real time, we got the Village of Hamlet and then nothing. We were like, where's it has all these pointers to this other thing. Where's the Temple of Elemental Evil? So we were so excited when it finally came out. And so when Gary was there, I was, oh, let's talk about the Temple of Elemental Evil.
um, so I want to, that reminds me that when you got your copy um, of the intro, the Holmes Basic set, what adventure was in there? What did you get out of that box? And
So
did you get dice? Do you have a dice or a chits version?
so I at first didn't have it. Just Reggie, the kid who was DMing for us,
Oh,
he had it. I eventually got a copy later, and my copy had chits. So yeah, my copy didn't even have dice in it.
what adventure did you have? Because, well, your answer, and then I'll tell you why I asked.
I think it was Into the Unknown.
Yeah. So that's the one that most people got. My
Mhm.
copy did have dice, but it had come during a period where they'd run out of Into the Unknown, and so they threw Village of Hamlet in there, which is
Oh
a
wow.
terrible first adventure to go through.
well, and um, well, Into the Unknown was magical because of how much it invited the players
Yeah,
and the DM to make up parts of the adventure. So right away, it was leaning into that magical hobby angle that I was talking about before. Um, yeah, I'm now boggled, Stan, thinking about the Village of Hamlet being my first experience. I mean, once we got to the Village of Hamlet, we loved it, but oh my gosh, both it and the Temple of Elemental Evil were complete meat grinders for my group. So many characters died that my group ended up having their own section of the town's graveyard just for members of the group who kept dying. And I remember when we finally went into the Temple of Elemental Evil, uh, I think several characters died, if I'm remembering correctly, in the very first room they went into.
yeah.
It and oh my God, was D&D so deadly back then?
My very first character, um, died with the giant toads outside the moat house in the village of Hamlet.
What was your character swallowed?
Yeah, oh yeah. We I use that when back around the announcement of third edition. We did a the last of the Ravenloft plays was a vignette, and one of them was supposed to take place in the village of Hamlet, and um, I forced them to use a line which was based on that, which was stick the toads by the moat house. They'll know what to do. No one else thought that was funny. I was like, you know what? No, I'm gonna. You guys have your in jokes. That's mine. Put it in there.
Well, Stan, now I'm always going to associate that classic image of the giant toad from first edition with the character's feet dangling out. I'm just going to
Oh yeah.
imagine that was your character, Stan.
You know what? There are worse things to be remembered for.
Well,
Um,
and
go ahead.
in in that childhood period, it's when I was in junior high school that the Dragonlance novels came out,
Right.
and and I thought of this because thinking of back then, it's hard for me not to then also be nostalgic about Dragonlance because I was so enchanted by those books that I was the naughty kid who kept bringing the novels into class and I would press them down flat on my desk behind the kid in front of me so the teacher couldn't see that I was reading Dragons of Autumn Twilight during my English class. And I actually read those novels before The Lord of the Rings. And so the Dragonlance Chronicles were foundational for me as fantasy stories. And then just as sort of D&D was a starting point for me when it came to hobby gaming, D&D novels really helped propel me into reading a lot of other modern fantasy fiction
Right.
because I was a big reader as a kid, but it was a lot of other things, and D&D really kind of propelled me into then reading all sorts of other genre fiction. Uh, and uh, Anytime I think of Dragonlance, Stan, I cannot resist an opportunity to embarrass you since we're here together. Because for those of you watching, when Stan and I were for a while both working at Wizards, I was so excited to meet you because you had created what is to this day one of my favorite RPG monster books ever made, which was the
uh,
Dragonlance Fifth Age Bestiary.
well, thank
Uh,
you.
and I, I never miss an opportunity to plug that book because it was a treasure.
No, thank you. You know what? I blush when you say it, and I never get tired of hearing it. All right. So I'm looking. I'm just looking at the time, and we're now. Let's. I could keep talking about your early days for the rest of the hour, but we only have about an hour. So let's jump into how did you get? Oh God, how did you get into professional writing and editing? Because that's the step that then gets you into gaming.
Yeah. So in school, uh, I followed followed what is my motto to this day, which is anything worth doing is worth overdoing. And so I was in college. I was a triple major. I majored in
God.
I, ma- I majored in English, philosophy, and religious studies. And I was actually preparing to be a university professor. And so I have my master's degree in religious studies. I was then working on a PhD in so the crossover between literature and theological traditions with a focus on the art and poetry of William Blake. And while I was preparing for this academic career, uh, my partner, now my husband, wanted to go back to school. And so I decided I'm going to pause my my graduate work so that I can work while he goes back to school to get an architecture degree.
Mm.
And it was while my PhD was on pause, which hilariously is on pause to this day, because I never went back. Spoiler alert. Uh, I started getting work uh, as an editor and a writer. And in that period, I was editing at first actually a number of computer books. It's funny, a little known fact for a while, one of the main Linux books on the market many years ago was a book that I was the lead editor of. Uh, and then spun that out into being a web developer in San Francisco. But I could never get away from the fact that my real passion was storytelling and gaming. And I had at first thought I was going to pursue that passion as a scholar. But I really, because I in grad, it was once I met my husband, he wanted to try D&D out. And so I decided to run it for him, and I had not played in a while because there was my
Mm.
late college, early grad school pause. And it's largely just like it was my sister who first introduced me to it. It was my husband who then urged me to get back to D&D because he wanted to try it out. Uh, and uh, he loved it, and that sort of rekindled my passion for role-playing games, for hobby games in general. And so as I was working as a web developer, I met a dear friend in the San Francisco Bay Area, Aaron Loeb,
Mm.
who was the writer of the Book of the Righteous for Green Ronin Publishing.
Right.
And he knew that I had been doing a lot of writing and editing on the side, uh, and I wanted to explore a potential career transition. So he put me in touch with Green Ronin Publishing, and they thankfully gave me a shot as the editor and developer of the D&D 3.5 version of the Book of Fiends. And so my very first published work was working on that book, converting every single stat block from third edition to 3.5. And then that led to me spending about 5 years as a freelancer. So I would work full time during the day at California College of the Arts, where I became the web manager. And then I would go home and work at night, working on RPG books. And so during that period, I co-designed the role-playing game Blue Rose with Steve Kenson, who is a dear friend of mine to this day. Uh, I worked on Mutants and Masterminds. I got to return to one of my favorite childhood RPGs, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I worked on the
Right.
second edition of that role-playing game. And as I sort of built up this body of work, I kept an eye on job postings at Wizards of the Coast. And, this was during the third edition period. And there was a job that came up. And, I asked my husband, well, should I try it? I mean, this was be a big transition for us if this actually
Right.
happens. But surely this is not going to happen. I mean, I thought this is a pipe dream. And so I applied, and my first interview there was with three people I adore: uh, Chris Perkins, Michelle Carter, and Kim Mohan. And to this day, thank my lucky stars that it was Chris, who was my first manager,
Mm.
who gave me the job. And Chris and I have been friends and creative partners ever since. And we're going on almost 18 years that we've been working together on D&D together, along with the many other wonderful people who've been on the different incarnations
Right.
of the D&D team with us, including you. Uh, and uh, and so I started my very first assignments it's funny, the very first thing, my first few weeks working at Wizards, the very first thing I worked on wasn't even D&D. I actually helped work on a Star Wars miniatures set because we still were publishing the Star Wars minis game at that time.
Right.
Uh, and then my first D&D assignment was the very last book of D&D 3.5, The City of Stormreach for Eberron, which delighted me because I was a fan of Eberron ever since it was announced. I eagerly watched the descriptions of it in Dragon Magazine leading up to its release. I've always been a fan of steampunk, and I love the Eberron's take on that genre. And so it was a delight that was my very first official D&D book to work on, and then hopped right from that into the Player's Handbook for fourth edition, and have essentially been sprinting working on book after book after book after book since then. And so this means I have now worked on three Player's Handbooks in a row. The fourth edition Player's Handbook, and then was the lead on the fifth edition Player's Handbook in 2014, and then again now the Player's Handbook in 2024. And so many books in between that I have worked on in various capacities, so many talented game designers and editors and art directors and graphic designers and artists have joined us in that work over the last, again, nearly 18 years.
So I had a little laugh at what you were saying. Again, having now done 50 plus interviews like this, the number of people whose stories include well, I tried for it, but there was no way I was going to get
Right.
it. And also the funny thing is, my first project wasn't even for D&D.
Yep. Yep.
Those have to be two of the strongest themes that run through all of these questions. Um, I'm just checking the chat. Sorry, I haven't been looking. I've been too busy drawing. There's a lot going on in this one. I love the fact that Minsk is on here. Minsk and
Yes.
who. How many of your professional friends went on, your childhood friends went on to become game professionals, if any?
So in our broader friend group, several people have gone on to work in games. I think those of us who are still working in games, I think two of us.
Yeah. Hey,
Me
that's. Oh,
and with me on D&D, and then Eric was one of the early designers on World of Warcraft and a primary designer on Hearthstone. So um, it's that is a fertile ground that my friends and I we grew up on.
Yeah, you know what? One of the things I know, this is true for me also. A lot of the people in my gaming group, when one person makes it, everyone gets a shot, and so I'd say a huge percentage of that game cohort of that time uh, have worked professionally, but it's only a handful that stick with it. In fact, it's only a handful that get to a second project, and it's a handful of those that stay with it.
Yeah. Well, because I mean, there are so many vicissitudes, as in any industry,
Right,
uh, and then also people's personal career paths zigzag. I mean, people decide, well, this was a lot of fun, but now it's time to go on another adventure.
right.
Uh, but what I also love is then the returns, because we've both worked with people who go off to do something else and then come back.
Like me.
And yeah, like you. And I think part of it is hard to avoid the siren call of D&D. It's like once you have said yes to it, it's like forever. You think you might
Right.
get away, but no, D&D will always come back.
Yeah, and it's you always miss it, and opportunities abound. There's always something where there's a chance to try uh, get back into just one more thing, and then suddenly that turns into 2 years of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so in let me just look at some of these questions I got here because crazily enough, we're already at an hour.
How did that happen?
Happens every time. Like it's 50 interviews, and it still takes me by surprise. All right, we're near. So I'll tell you what. Before I do that, we're nearly at an hour, so I'm going to stop with my drawing because I'm at a good point. This is as far as I'm taking it during the show. Those of you who have watched before know I will finish it afterwards. And if you are a subscriber to our free newsletter, 50 years in the dungeon.substack.com, you'll be the first people to get to see the finished version when it's done. Um, and let's say free newsletter. There's also a paid version. Paid version gets to see the process video when it's all done. But sign up there. You'll get to see it. Minsk in full Stanish color.
I can't
Uh,
wait. And it's already looking fabulous.
thank you. All right, so I'm gonna come back here. I'm gonna put that aside. Um, and and he said, trying to vamp. Um, Alpha Stream and Michael J. Pastor both sent in some questions. I'm going to handpick a few of them. Thank you, guys. That's another benefit of being a subscriber is you can send in your questions ahead of time, and that increases. So if you put it in the chat, we try to see them. I look at it here. I've got it on my screen in front of me for those two. So lucky them. So you used to do the sage advice on
Mm-hmm.
several places, Twitter and on the website and such. Um, and Alpha Stream says it's a nice way to honor the tradition of sage advice from Dragon Magazine. Uh, but he's wondering where's the best place for fans today to find that kind of Wizards, D&D team specific errata and detail material.
Well, upcoming, there will be a revised Sage Advice compendium. So stay tuned. That is actually something we are working on because we know that that is a valuable resource for people. And we have been so focused on completing the trilogy of revised core rule books and the new starter set that as we've emerged from that massive project, thought, okay, we need to revive Sage Advice because uh, people always have questions about the game, and there will be new questions because of evolution in the rules, and plus, it's always fun for us to see, what not only what people are pondering, but also some of the fun and occasionally bonkers situations that arise in everyone's games that lead to the questions that
Right,
get sent
right.
in. And it was definitely fun, the period of that sort of direct interaction on Twitter, uh, and it was sort of a moment in time, but I ended up stepping back from it partly because it got to the point where it just was not a good platform to be able to even like sort past questions and answers. And that's one reason we started gathering the questions and answers into a single place in the compendium. And then I just ran out of time because
Yeah.
what a lot of people didn't realize at the time is I was answering a lot of those questions in my free time. That was like bonus hours,
Yeah.
and often just my work on our books and other projects got to be so time consuming. I just didn't have the bandwidth for it, but I miss it because it was fun to see in real time, how people were using the rules, what they were thinking about it. You could give an answer, then get a response right back. So we won't be reviving that exactly, because partly because there's also not really a single platform that people gather around. That's one reason I refer to kind of a moment of time. There was this, I think many of us will look back on it nostalgically in the number of years, that brief period. It was just a year or two where, uh, the gaming community in particular, so many of us were all gathered on Twitter and felt like it was a vibrant place for us to communicate with each other, and that's just unfortunately not true anymore.
Yeah, I think that I think that period of social media, as brief as it was, is going to have the same resonance that people who at that time were talking about what it used to be like when it was Dragon Magazine, or the magazines were the only way you could connect with people, and how that uh, they missed that. I mean, it's always something, right? Oh, there's
Yeah.
nostalgia. There's always going to be more nostalgia forming behind you.
Yeah.
Um, there's a bunch of questions here about the playtesting, various aspects of the playtesting process, um, and the interaction between uh, those of you who are working on developing the books in each of the generations, each of the editions that you did it, and the art that went with it, because that, although that goes to the art directors, I mean, the question kind of is, what's your input there? And then I'll get to the other playtesting. I think that's an interesting question, though. So
So, do you want to talk
let's
about
start with
art?
the art. Yeah.
So the art team and our game design team work very closely together. And when we are planning out a book, we are often, as two teams, imagining together the sort of visual identity that we would like a particular book to have. And that was especially the case with the new core books. The new core books, in many ways, represent a an evolved way of working within our team, where the art directors were with us in the room, and sometimes it was an actual room and sometimes it was a virtual room, but they were in the room with us from the beginning, plotting out these new books. And in many cases it was also the art directors, uh, their thinking as well as our concept artists thinking, that sometimes nudged our game design in various directions. It was really a delightful process where our concept artists, guided by our art directors, would come up with images for the different subclasses and the monsters in the monster manual, or the magic items in the dungeon master's guide. And it was early enough in the process that we could study their sketches and say, wow, they added these details that are so cool. We're going to add elements to the game design to honor what they've created in the art. And so I would say that the revised fifth edition rule books represent a really unusually high level of collaboration between sort of the art side of the house and the word side of the house. And I look at each of these new core books, and I'm looking down because they're stacked here on the desk, because I constantly refer to them as a part of our work. uh, I view each of these as a collaboration, not just among all the writers and editors, but also very deeply with the art directors and the artists and the graphic designers, because so much of how we built these wasn't just about what's the game design going to be and how are we going to express it, but also really exploring how are we going to present things visually, and not just in terms of illustrations, but also in terms of the mood that we want to present, the style of information presentation to try to make it easier for people to find things, both when they're preparing for their games and when they're playing their games.
Mm.
And so much of the advances that I think people are seeing in these three books are because of the deep collaboration between art and writing.
Mike Michael J. Pastor says, "Is there a nickname for the house style, which seems I don't know. Does that
Oh, the house art style?
yeah.
No, not really. And we often refer to it as sort of classic high fantasy, but uh, we we love playing in that pool, but then also diverging from it. And people are going to see in our upcoming books more and more sort of artistic experimentations. We've announced that our upcoming Dragon book, uh, Dragon Delves, one of the big features of it is some wildly different art styles for each of the different dragons, including even black and white line drawings in one case to harken back to the black and white drawings that were the norm for D&D. Uh, and I love them. Uh, and we also, even when we are using that sort of classic high fantasy illustration style, we strive to show different moods. And you can see that in the new core books. You like if you go to the barbarian and look at each of the barbarian subclasses, they actually have very different moods from each other. Like the very first barbarian is a classic roaring barbarian that anyone looking at that was like, "Yep, that's a barbarian." But then what we did with each class is we used the subclass illustrations as a way to demonstrate just how broad the yeah, that guy over there. I mean, look at him roaring in this burning battlefield. It's dark. This is grim fantasy. But then, right on the facing page, then you also have more colorful, magical take. And this was all very intentional on our part because a big part of D&D's power is uh, it's not just one thing. D&D has within its broad tent grimdark fantasy. It has playful, whimsical fantasy. It has horror. It has magitech. It has the old west, combined with fantasy and all sorts of other takes on fantasy and its various subgenres. And so we, especially with the new core books, because they are the rule books for the whole D&D multiverse. We wanted to make sure that you got a glimpse of many of the main places in the multiverse in these books. Uh, and a part of that was also making sure that each of the chapter openers in the new player's handbook was a nod to a different D&D world. And so that's why you'll see chapter opener that's Dragonlance, chapter opener that's the Forgotten Realms, a chapter opener that's Greyhawk, uh, another that's Eberron, another one that's Spelljammer, and so on and so forth.
I'll tell you, and again, I'm about to hijack this for me to say something I think, but it's my show, so I get to do that. Over the years that I was involved with it, the thinking and from both artistically and business wise has shifted as it tends to. But I was there for a lot of time when they were going from. So when I got there, D&D had set the stage for what fantasy art was, and now it kind of felt generic. It in the mid '90s when I joined it, and it wasn't generic, but everyone else had caught up, and D&D wasn't pushing the envelope the way it had done in the '80s, and with third edition and 3.5, and I wasn't there for 4, but it looks like 4 also. There's a lot of effort to establish a house style so that when you looked at art and saw it, you could say that's D&D. That couldn't be anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which, from a business perspective, made a lot of sense. But for my heart, what I missed was what you just said there, and that's it. The thing about D&D is it can be anything, and the art stopped exploring as broadly as what we were just looking at and what you were saying, and I'm very heartened to see that. I tell you, as a cartoonist, one of the things I'd love to see is more, even further pushing that. But I've I've made my peace with the fact that I'm never having a piece of mine in a core D&D book. Well, not a core book, but I
Stan,
will say,
never say never.
you know what, I will, because then I get to eat crow later on when it happens, or stand with my arms folded. Say, I told you if it doesn't. Um, but yes, no, I love the fact and in fact, one of the questions here from AlphaStream was about the glam rock bard, and what I was going to say, reading his question, was that I remember back in 2012 when you and Mike first started talking about we need to have a glam rock bard,
Yep.
and
Yep.
how much that has popped in and out. That this was years in the making, as the kind of thing that you guys think about.
Absolutely. And you can see in that bard section, uh, again, the aesthetic range that I'm talking about also demonstrated, where yeah, you have that fabulous glam rock bard, but then you also have on a previous page very classic high fantasy bard. This is here. Here she is, you know, uh, studying her music in classic uh, costuming, showing that D&D has room for not only these two but many more. And yeah, and then he there you have yet another take of fabulousness. And then the the Valor Bard, yet an entirely different
Yeah,
mood, and that all very consciously done on our part, because we were not only wanting to make sure that we were portraying the subclasses well and inspiring people to consider playing them by seeing the art, but again we wanted to make sure that we were also showing a range of fantasy subgenres, a range of moods. And so yeah, throughout you're going to see, you know, you're going to see occasionally a grimdark character, and then occasionally just pure whimsy,
yeah.
uh, and everything in between.
Um, is there anything that you learned? So there's a huge playtest process, which, like I say, actually stretches back to the early 2014 edition. Like it's been a nonstop process through. Um, and there are things that have come in that you've tried in some of your articles that then didn't make it, and things like the glam rock that eventually did make it. Is there anything that came out of that process that that's still on the cutting room floor that uh, you wish had found a spot?
Oh, it's a good question, but also it's a tricky one, because I I am a pack rat when it comes to the things we design that don't make it. And for me, I so often see when something goes out for playtesting, and when the answer largely is no, we take that seriously, and so we're like, okay, we're not going to do it, or we're not going to do it the way
Now,
we're not going to do it now. But for me, always the subtext is not it's not a no forever. It just means not yet.
right,
And it means either the community just doesn't want it right now, or we just haven't found the best way to do it yet.
right,
And one of the things with, we're all just endlessly creating things, we we really strive on our team not to be too attached to any one thing, so much so that like we're going to insist that this makes it into the game even if everyone says they don't want it. It's like, no, this is D&D it's this shared wonderful thing that other people created, and that any of us who either work on as professionals or as hobbyists, I view all of us as we're stewards of this wonderful
so
thing.
I was just about to use that word in my next question to you.
And 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 so for me, it's just, well, we'll see. And so pretty much anything that like doesn't make it, that people saw in UA and then got cut, so often it ends up coming back in a different form. One great example of this, back when we were first doing Unearthed Arcana for the Artificer that was going to appear, for the first time in Eberron Rising from the Last War, there was a subclass that we included in Unearthed Arcana called the Archivist, and this was something I really was enchanted by the concept of it, but it just really didn't land when we sent it out. And so that was it. This is a great example of, I saw that as like, all right, it's not its time. Well, that subclass did end up in the game, but just not in the Artificer. We transformed it into a wizard subclass for the Order of Scribes. And when we sent it out as a wizard subclass, people were then like, now we really like it. And we got it there to being a wizard subclass because we studied the feedback on the Artificer version so carefully. And one of the things that kept arising in that feedback was, this feels more like a wizard subclass. And again, we take the feedback seriously, and we're like, well, when there's an opportunity, we'll give it a go as a wizard subclass. And now it's in the game. So for me, there's sort of there's no lost darlings. It's just darlings that are waiting, and they'll eventually get their day.
Is there anything that has you've been run through that process multiple times and it's still so I mean things we've seen that you're trying to find the next iteration of?
So thus far, every time we've, like, if something didn't make it the first time and then we do a second go, thus far everything has always made it on the second go. If we've waited some time and like we bring it back, sometimes with a completely different identity, again, like the Artificer subclass had a costume change and came back as a wizard. Yeah, if we wait long enough, we study the feedback, we play test a bunch. uh, Thus far, our success ratio is, it always makes it, if we go back to it and and we take that care, which we always do. But that also means then the wait for those things could be a while, because we want to make sure that if we're going to do another go,
Mm.
we have that feeling that anyone who creates something, you'll often have that sensation of, no, we got it. I'm convinced we got it this time. And fingers crossed that will keep being the case. But of course, there could always be one where even the new version, people are like, nope, still not yet.
So I guess a good part of this is we talked a lot now about the play testing and that it has been and will be ongoing. If people want to be involved in that, how do they get involved in it?
The best place is to keep an eye on the D&D Beyond homepage, which is where new Unearthed Arcana articles are announced and where you can download them. And then when the survey opens for them, where you can enter in your feedback. And, we've already in the new year had a couple of Unearthed Arcana articles, and we have more on the way. And, people are going to get to see more and more previews of things we are exploring for both products we've announced and products we haven't announced, because also we are sometimes tricksy goblins, and we will put things into Unearthed Arcana that's actually for some future product that we haven't even announced, just so we can start testing the water to see, all right, how do people feel about this? Because it has been such a wonderful part of fifth edition's journey to have this sort of ongoing conversation between the design team and the community. And so much of the community is in what we publish, because we believe so passionately in it being this thing that we are stewarding all together. And because for me, our goal, my endless goal is I want two entirely different people half a century from now uh, to be nostalgically talking about the previous 50 years of D&D, and at that point they'll be celebrating a century of Dungeons and Dragons. And so for me, that's I'm always excited about sort of what's immediately in front of us and the game as it currently stands, but also very mindful of, just as there were many people who came before us to lay the groundwork for all of the work that my teams are doing now, there are going to be many people after us. And it's like we try to keep it as healthy as possible for whoever is next going to be the steward for this wonderful game.
Wow, you are the perfect guest because you just took my segue to the outro and you landed the plane. You just talked about the next 50 years right there. What so actually um I would like to ask, we have understandably been focusing on D&D in this conversation, but this 50th anniversary has been one for, D&D started the whole hobby, which means that it's not just D&D's anniversary. It's tabletop role playing. It's role playing as a game. And as you were saying, you played lots of different games, looking kind of letting D&D be what it is, looking at the rest of the hobby and where it's at now. What do you make about this half century pivot point, and what do you see going forward?
So not only am I thrilled at how much D&D has grown, especially in the last 10 years. I think 20 years ago, as video games became such a major force in gaming, many people were predicting the death of D&D and other tabletop role-playing games. And I am so delighted that the rumors of D&D and RPG's demise were not only not true, but who knew there was going to be this massive renaissance? Because there are more people playing D&D now than ever before. Uh, and so, in the midst of that, I've also been delighted to see how vibrant the broader gaming community is. And this not only in RPGs, but also in board games,
Mm-hmm.
also in video games. The number of gaming options we have, those of us who are, gaming omnivores like like myself, it's dizzying. I mean, I go on Board Game Geek every few weeks. I can't even keep track of everything coming out. I mean, though this it's sort of is this embarrassment of riches. So I often rely on various people's top tens just to try to narrow down the options to the ones I should be trying. I consider this to be it's a very high class problem we now have, especially thinking back to those early days when it's like, well, there are three games. Do you want to play one of these three? And so now to have so many, it's difficult to even keep track of them. It's really a delight. I love when I'm at Gen Con and other conventions, walking the exhibit hall floor, just seeing this amazing sea of creativity in so many different types of games. And I don't think you can see in this current shot, but there are D&D books right behind me, or rather over here. Oh, I don't know, because it's backwards. I don't know which way I'm pointing. Um, but then, but then. Uh, what's out of frame is a whole bookcase filled with other RPGs,
Mm.
because my fandom for other RPGs has not subsided. I love reading them. I like playing them. So many wonderful things being explored, whether it's in the areas of storytelling, game mechanics, book layout, and so I hope that not only in a a century, well, rather 50 years, and so then the 100-year celebration for D&D, it will also be a celebration of how the whole gaming industry has continued to evolve, and and people can look back and, my God, look at all these amazing games. and how they have influenced each other, how the designers have inspired each other, how the communities for those games have also inspired the game's evolutions. And I think the I am sometimes against my better judgment, kind of a relentless optimist, and so I think um, even if at various times markets can make things challenging for different parts of gaming. I believe so much in the creative spirit, as well as the scrappiness of many of the people that created this industry, and many of the people who continue to work in it. That no matter what happens, it's like we will figure out a way, and the people after us will figure out a way, because these games, especially RPGs, are a creative art form that I think so many people have now discovered is such a powerful way to bring groups of friends together, to create together. That again, I'm optimistic that it will be going on for decades to come, uh, and sort of amid that, I dream of D&D continuing to be the the great first, that the one that started it all, that is how many people get their start. But then I also hope people try other games, and uh, often I love coming back to D&D after playing other games because I love those other games. And what I often find is, rather than sort of playing other games, like knocking a game out of the running, what it does is it just makes me appreciate what I love about each of the games. As you start seeing, well, each of them has some jewel in them. Each of them does something so well. And so I often get sad when I see people sort of act as if it's like this zero sum game, and I'm like, for me, this glorious field of yes and. Like, why pick one game? let's play as many as we can fit into our lives while we're here, because there are so many of them have delights in their design, things to learn about, uh, things that, especially those of us who make games as professionals or hobbyists, things to learn from fellow designers, because there are so many and wonderfully creative people working on these games. Like, we all have things to learn from each other. And I think it's a grave mistake when any of us think, like, any one game is ever going to be like the do everything better than every other game. Like that there will never be one game that does it all. And uh, and and because I think often, games need a focus. They have a point of view, and it's important, I think, for the designers to have a point of view and sort of know what is their game. And one of the things that was really important for us, over a decade ago, when we were first making 5e, was really embracing just D&D as D&D, and really really loving the game for what it is and recognizing what it isn't, and always focusing on how can we make the D&D-ness of D&D as great as it can be, uh, and be happy also just in the fact that, and then there are other games that do other things wonderfully well,
Yeah.
in different genres with different play styles, and not sort of haunt ourselves trying to make D&D be all games, and instead, like, no, we just want D&D to be just awesome Dungeons and Dragons.
All right. You know what? That could be the launching pad for an hour and a half conversation. But since we've just finished one,
Yes.
I'm gonna put a pin in that. God, I really would love to. I would love to have that conversation right now, but we're not gonna. Jeremy, thank you very much for coming on. Is there anything? You know what? I feel like on Hot Ones. I don't know if you've watched the Hot Ones show, with the hot chicken wings eating show? No,
No, I
you
haven't.
don't. Oh my God, are you even aware of it?
No.
Oh, so the short version is there's a show where they've got a raft of 10 chicken wings, each
Oh,
sauce hotter
that
than the
show.
yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've
At
seen
the
clips of
very
it.
end, he says, all right, this camera, this camera, this camera. Tell the people what you got going on in the world. We're about to go out. Jeremy, what is it you wanted to say to folks to look at or to think about or what? This is your plug time.
I would say just keep an eye out for the exciting things coming for D&D, but also for the exciting things just happening more broadly in gaming. I am a big believer in all of us always looking for our bliss, encouraging that in each other, in our friends, and just always look for ways to enhance the enjoyment of the people around us, because I know sometimes the world can be a rough place, and so many of us find solace and connection in our D&D games or whatever game it is we're currently playing with our buddies. And so cling to that. And I know it gives me solace, and I hope it does to all of you.
All right. Well, so Jeremy, I'm going to go out and do a little outro. Hang on, and we'll say our goodbyes. But thank you very much for coming and having this conversation with us.
I've loved it, Stan, and hopefully we'll do another one.
I hope so. All right. So there we go. That was my conversation with Jeremy Crawford. And hopefully, as you just heard there, maybe not the one, my first conversation with Jeremy, though clearly not my first. Uh, wow, that was a fun. These hours always go quickly. That one went especially quickly, and I really want to talk more. Oh well. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for everyone who's been in the chat and left comments. If you are watching, or wherever you're watching right now, please take a minute and give it a thumbs up or a heart or a like, whatever it is. This is streaming to several different platforms at the same time. This will help. It will make me feel good about myself. Yes, I'll blush a little. That'll be all right. But the main thing it's going to do is to help get this show shown super. It'll get this. All right, we're almost done, Stan. Get through it. It will get the show introduced to more people. The algorithm will pick it up. The algorithm, not such an evil thing, but you got to know how to play it. And one of the ways we play it is to get those likes. Give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment. I know those of you who've been leaving comments in chat. That's great. It helps even more if after this goes in and is watchable as a rerun, just leave a little comment there. Again, these are the things that those algorithms pick up, and it helps to tell them to show this show to more people. I got to find some other nouns for that sentence next time. Anyway, I will be back tomorrow with another episode of Random Encounters, my improv cartooning show. So come on back. We're going to have an Academy Award Oscars special. So if you're interested in seeing what that is and being one of the people that helps decide what it is I'm going to draw, same time, same place, come on back. I will also be back next week with a new episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon. How is that possible? I've done all the years. Well, we'll talk about that. I hope you'll come back and find out. Till then, everyone take care, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.